Ryan Cole stood frozen in his hallway, his daughter asleep just rooms away, staring at the closed door where his neighbor had just confessed she was in love with him. In 30 seconds, everything he thought he understood about his carefully controlled life had shattered. The worst part? He had a first date in 20 minutes with someone else, a date Maya had just helped him get ready for. As her words echoed in his mind, Ryan realized he'd been so focused on not falling that he'd missed the fact he was already halfway there. Sometimes the person you've been searching for has been right next door all along, and sometimes you're too terrified to see it until it's almost too late. If you've ever been blind to what was right in front of you, stay with me until the end of this story, and let me know in the comments what city you're watching from. I love seeing how far these stories travel. Hit that like button if you're ready for a journey about second chances and the courage it takes to finally see what matters. Ryan Cole had perfected the art of invisible living. At 32, his existence had been carefully constructed around predictability, safety, and the singular purpose of raising his 7-year-old daughter, Emma, in as stable an environment as his fractured life could provide. The apartment complex on Riverside Drive wasn't much. 3 stories of weathered brick with parking spaces that flooded when it rained, and a laundry room that smelled perpetually of fabric softener and disappointment. But it was theirs. More importantly, it was manageable, controllable. Nothing unexpected happened on Riverside Drive, and that was exactly how Ryan needed it. His days followed a rhythm so precise it could be set to music. Wake at 6. Make Emma's lunch while the coffee brewed. Lay out her clothes. She'd recently developed opinions about patterns, which complicated mornings but made him smile. Drop her at Willow Creek Elementary by 7:45. Exchange pleasantries with Ms. Chen at the front desk, then drive 20 minutes to the distribution warehouse where he managed inventory systems. 8 hours of spreadsheets, shipping manifests, and the comfortable isolation of numbers that always added up correctly. Pick Emma up at 3:30, homework at the kitchen table while he prepped dinner. Bath time, story time, lights out by 8. Then, and only then, did Ryan allow himself to breathe. It was during those evening hours, when Emma's soft breathing filtered through the baby monitor he probably didn't need anymore, but couldn't bring himself to remove, that Ryan's life intersected with Maya Lewis. Maya had moved into 3B 18 months ago, right next door to Ryan's 3A, arriving on a Saturday afternoon with nothing but a compact sedan full of boxes and a determination that seemed to radiate from her like heat. Ryan had been coming back from the park with Emma when he'd seen her struggling with a bookshelf that clearly required 2 people and an engineering degree to navigate up the stairwell. Need a hand? He'd offered, and she'd looked at him with eyes the color of dark honey and a smile that seemed to acknowledge both the absurdity of her situation and her gratitude for his intervention. I need several hands, a forklift, and possibly divine intervention, she'd replied, pushing a strand of black hair away from her face, but I'll settle for one neighbor who doesn't mind heavy lifting. They'd gotten the bookshelf upstairs, along with most of her other furniture, while Emma supervised from the hallway, offering commentary on proper box stacking techniques she'd apparently learned from a cartoon about helpful trucks. By the end of the afternoon, Maya had insisted on ordering pizza for all 3 of them, and somehow, without Ryan quite understanding how it happened, a friendship had formed. Not romance, never romance. Ryan had made that clear to himself from the beginning, even if he'd never spoken it aloud. Maya was beautiful, yes, objectively, undeniably beautiful in a way that seemed effortless, with sharp cheekbones and an athlete's build that came from the early morning runs he'd see her leave for while he was making Emma's lunch. But beauty wasn't enough to breach the walls Ryan had constructed. Nothing was. Emma's mother, Jen, had left when their daughter was 2 years old. Just left. No dramatic fight, no discovered affair, no addiction or abuse or any of the narrative reasons that might have made sense of the abandonment. She'd simply decided, one autumn morning, that motherhood wasn't what she wanted, that the life they'd built together felt like a cage, and that she needed to find herself before she lost herself entirely. She'd kissed Emma goodbye, told Ryan she was sorry in a voice that sounded more relieved than regretful, and driven away in the same Toyota Camry they'd bought together when they'd still believed in joint decisions and shared futures. That had been 5 years ago. 5 years of single parenting, of learning to braid hair through YouTube tutorials, of attending dance recitals and parent-teacher conferences alone while other families arrived in pairs. 5 years of Emma asking questions about her mother that Ryan answered with careful honesty, never bad-mouthing Jen, but never quite able to explain her absence in ways that didn't make his daughter feel somehow insufficient. 5 years of Ryan learning that love, real, unconditional, stay through the hard parts love, was something he could give Emma, but shouldn't risk accepting for himself. Because people left. That was the lesson. People looked at their lives, decided the cost outweighed the benefit, and left. And Ryan would be damned if he'd give Emma another person to love and lose. So Maya remained his neighbor, his friend, someone he could talk to during those quiet evening hours when Emma was asleep and the apartment felt too big and too small simultaneously. They'd fallen into an easy pattern. She'd knock around 9, he'd already have coffee brewing, and they'd sit on his worn couch talking about everything and nothing. Her job as a physical therapist at County General, his frustrations with warehouse management, her family in Oregon, his complete lack of family anywhere. She'd tell him about the patients she'd helped that day, their small victories and setbacks, and he'd find himself genuinely interested in these strangers' progress. He'd talk about Emma's latest obsession, currently a phase involving extensive questions about why horses sleep standing up, and Maya would laugh with the kind of warmth that suggested she actually found his daughter's curiosity charming rather than exhausting. Sometimes they'd watch movies, old comedies mostly, the kind where you could predict every plot point but found comfort in that predictability. Maya would fall asleep during the third act, her head tilting toward his shoulder but never quite touching, and Ryan would sit very still, careful not to wake her, wondering why those moments felt more intimate than anything he'd experienced in years. But it was just friendship, comfort, the kind of connection that made life more bearable without requiring vulnerability or risk. That's what Ryan told himself, and he'd gotten very good at believing his own carefully constructed narratives. The shift began on a Tuesday in late September, when Ryan's coworker, Derek, had approached him during their lunch break with an unexpected proposition. "My wife's sister is visiting from Denver," Derek had said, settling into the chair across from Ryan with his usual lack of preamble. "She's recently divorced, very nice, actually interesting to talk to. Sarah thinks you two might hit it off." Ryan had looked up from his sandwich, genuinely confused. "Hit it off? A date, man. You know, dinner, conversation, the ancient ritual of two adults spending time together without the presence of small children or work obligations." "I don't date." "Yeah, I've noticed. You've been here 3 years, and the most personal thing I know about you is that you have a kid, and you're weirdly passionate about inventory optimization. Sarah thinks you need to get out more." "Sarah doesn't know me." "Exactly, which is why her opinion is unbiased and therefore more valid than yours." Derek had grinned, the expression of someone who knew he was being obnoxious but didn't particularly care. "Come on. One dinner. Her name's Rebecca. She's a teacher. She's funny, and she's only in town until Sunday. Low pressure. No expectations. Just two adults having a meal." Ryan had wanted to say no. The refusal had been right there, ready to deploy with all his usual excuses. But something had stopped him. Maybe the way Derek had phrased it as low pressure. Maybe the sudden awareness that Emma had recently asked why he never had friends over, the way her classmate Zoe's dad did. Maybe just the accumulated weight of 18 months watching Maya exist in his life, without ever allowing himself to want more than her friendship. "One dinner," he'd heard himself say, "but I'm not promising anything beyond showing up." That had been Thursday. By Saturday evening, Ryan was standing in front of his bathroom mirror, trying to decide between a blue button-down and a gray one, feeling ridiculous and anxious and wondering why he'd agreed to this in the first place. "Emma, do I look okay?" he'd called out, and his daughter had appeared in the doorway, already in her pajamas, her hair still damp from her bath. "You look fancy," she'd assessed seriously. "Are you going somewhere important?" "Just dinner with a friend of Derek's from work." "Is it a date?" Emma had asked with the bluntness of 7-year-olds everywhere. Ryan had hesitated, unsure how to answer. "It's dinner," he'd finally said. "I'll be back before you're asleep. Mrs. Patterson is going to hang out here with you, and she said you can have ice cream if you ask nicely." Emma had nodded, satisfied with this arrangement, and wandered back to her room where she'd been constructing an elaborate zoo from her stuffed animals. Ryan had returned to his reflection, still uncertain about the shirts. That's when he thought of Maya. The knock on her door had been automatic, the kind of thoughtless action that came from months of routine. She'd answered quickly, dressed in running shorts and an old university t-shirt, her hair pulled back in a ponytail. "Hey," she'd said, smiling. "What's up?" "I need a female perspective," Ryan had replied, holding up both shirts. "Blue or gray?" Something had flickered across her face then, too quick for him to identify. "What's the occasion?" "Dinner, date. Derek set it up with his sister-in-law. I'm probably overthinking this, but—" "Blue?" Maya had interrupted, her voice steady. "Definitely blue. It brings out your eyes." Ryan had looked at her, surprised. "I didn't know you'd noticed my eyes." "I notice everything, Ryan." She'd said it lightly, casually, but something in her expression had shifted, a door opening that Ryan had never realized existed. "You should know that by now." He'd laughed, uncomfortable without knowing why. "Right. Well, blue it is then. Thanks." "Ryan." Her voice had stopped him as he'd turned to leave. When he'd looked back, she'd been standing in her doorway, one hand on the frame, her expression unreadable. "Can I ask you something?" "Of course." "Why now? You've turned down every setup Derek's attempted for the last year. Why agree to this one?" The question had caught him off guard. "I don't know," he'd answered honestly. "Maybe I'm tired of my life being so small. Maybe Emma asking about why I don't have friends over made me realize I've been hiding. Maybe I just thought it was time to try." Maya had nodded slowly, and Ryan had seen something in her eyes that looked like pain, quickly masked. "That's good. You deserve to try. You deserve to be happy." "Thanks, Maya. I'll tell you how it goes tomorrow over coffee." "Actually," she'd said, her voice quieter now, "I don't think that's a good idea." Ryan had frowned. "Coffee? We always have coffee on Sunday mornings." "I know, but I think—" She'd paused, and Ryan had watched her gather herself, straightening her shoulders like she was preparing for something difficult. "I think we need to talk about something first, before you go on this date, before you move forward with trying." "Okay," Ryan had said slowly, confused and increasingly aware that something was happening here, something significant that he couldn't quite identify. "What do we need to talk about?" Maya had looked at him then, really looked at him, and Ryan had seen 18 months of careful friendship suddenly become transparent, all the things they'd never said rising to the surface like objects released from underwater. "I'm in love with you," she'd said simply. "I have been for months, maybe longer, and I know you don't feel the same way. I know you've made it very clear that you're not looking for a relationship, and I've respected that. I've been your friend and only your friend because that's what you needed. But I can't watch you get dressed for a date with someone else and not tell you the truth. I can't keep pretending that these coffee mornings and late-night movies don't mean more to me than they mean to you. It's not fair to either of us." The world had tilted. Ryan had felt it physically, like the hallway had shifted beneath his feet. "Maya, you don't have to say anything," she'd continued, rushing now, words spilling out like water from a broken dam. "I don't expect anything from you. I'm not trying to guilt you or change your mind or interfere with your date. I just needed you to know. I needed to stop hiding it, because if you're going to try to be happy, if you're going to open yourself up to someone, you should do it knowing all your options. You should do it understanding that someone who already knows you, who already cares about Emma, who's already part of your life, might want to be more than just your neighbor." Ryan had stood there, the blue shirt still in his hand, unable to form words. Part of him wanted to respond, to say something that would fix this moment, but his mind had gone completely blank. All he could think about was the date waiting for him across town, the carefully constructed walls he'd built around his heart, and the sudden, terrifying realization that Maya had somehow slipped inside those walls without him noticing. "I have to go," he'd finally managed, the words inadequate and cruel even as he'd said them. "Rebecca's expecting me. We have reservations. I can't just—" "I know," Maya had said, and there'd been something like resignation in her voice. "Go. Have your date. Like I said, I don't expect anything. I just needed you to know." She'd stepped back into her apartment then, and Ryan had watched her door close with a soft click that had sounded unbearably final. He'd driven to the restaurant in a daze, the blue shirt he'd chosen now feeling like a costume, a prop in someone else's story. The date itself had been fine. Rebecca was exactly as Derek had described, warm and funny and genuinely interesting. She'd taught fifth grade for 8 years, had strong opinions about the Oxford comma, and told stories about her students that reminded him of the way Maya talked about her patients, finding humanity and humor in everyday interactions. Under different circumstances, Ryan might have enjoyed the evening. Rebecca was attractive, intelligent, easy to talk to. She'd asked about Emma with what seemed like genuine interest, laughed at his self-deprecating stories about single parenthood, and by the end of dinner had suggested they do it again before she returned to Denver. But Ryan hadn't been present. Not really. He'd responded appropriately, laughed at the right moments, asked follow-up questions that suggested engagement, but his mind had been elsewhere. Specifically, it had been in the hallway of his apartment building, replaying Maya's confession, examining it from every angle, like a jeweler studying a stone for flaws. "I'm in love with you." 4 words. 4 simple, devastating words that had recontextualized 18 months of friendship in a single moment. Every coffee, every movie night, every casual conversation suddenly looked different through this new lens. Had she been waiting all this time? Had every moment of warmth and laughter been laced with hope and longing that Ryan had been too blind or too scared to see? "You seem distracted," Rebecca had observed somewhere between the entrees and dessert, her tone gentle rather than accusatory. Ryan had looked up, realizing he'd been pushing his pasta around his plate without eating. "I'm sorry, I've got a lot on my mind." "Want to talk about it?" "Not really," he'd admitted, "but thank you for offering." She'd smiled, the expression understanding. "You know what? I appreciate your honesty. Most guys would pretend everything's fine and then ghost me after tonight. At least you're being real about being checked out." "I'm sorry," Ryan had said again, meaning it. "You deserve better than a date who's mentally somewhere else." "We all do," Rebecca had agreed. "But life's messy like that. For what it's worth, Derek was right about you being a good guy. And whoever has you this distracted is very lucky, whether they know it or not." They'd finished dinner quickly after that, skipping dessert by mutual unspoken agreement. Ryan had walked Rebecca to her car, accepted her friendly hug, and watched her drive away without bothering to pretend he'd call. They both knew he wouldn't. The drive home had been quiet, just Ryan and his thoughts, and the growing certainty that he'd made a terrible mistake. Not in going on the date. That had been fine, if pointless. The mistake had been in how he'd left things with Maya, in walking away from her confession without giving her any response beyond stunned silence and a cowardly excuse about reservations. It was nearly 11 when Ryan pulled into the parking lot at Riverside Drive. Mrs. Patterson's car was still there, which meant Emma was fine, probably asleep, definitely safe. That knowledge should have been comforting, but all Ryan felt was a gnawing anxiety about the conversation he knew he needed to have. Maya's apartment was dark, her curtains drawn. Ryan stood in the hallway between their doors, key in hand, trying to decide what to do. Knock? Wait until morning? Pretend the conversation had never happened and hope they could somehow return to comfortable friendship? Even as he thought it, he knew that last option was impossible. You couldn't unknow someone's love. You couldn't pretend vulnerability hadn't been offered and received. The friendship they'd had, easy, uncomplicated, safe, was gone, replaced by something rawer and more honest and infinitely more terrifying. Ryan let himself into his apartment, paid Mrs. Patterson, checked on Emma, who was indeed asleep, her stuffed elephant clutched in one arm, and then stood in his living room trying to figure out what he was feeling. Fear, definitely. The bone-deep terror that came from recognizing you might want something you'd sworn off wanting. Guilt, because he'd hurt Maya with his reaction, or lack thereof. Confusion, because his entire understanding of their relationship had been upended in a single conversation. But underneath all of that, if he was being honest with himself, was something else. Something that felt dangerously close to relief. Someone who already knows you, who already cares about Emma, who's already part of your life, might want to be more than just your neighbor. Ryan sat on the couch where he and Maya had watched dozens of movies, where she'd fallen asleep with her head tilted toward his shoulder, where they'd talked about everything except the possibility of being more than friends. He thought about Emma asking why he never had friends over, about the careful loneliness of his life, about the walls he'd built that had seemed so necessary after Jen left. And he thought about Maya, not as his neighbor or his friend, but as a woman who'd seen him at his most ordinary, making lunches, stressed about work, exhausted from parenting, and had somehow decided he was worth loving anyway. The realization didn't come like a revelation. It came like a slow sunrise, inevitable and gradual and suddenly impossible to deny. He hadn't let himself see it because seeing it would have required acknowledging want, and want meant vulnerability, and vulnerability meant risk. But Maya had been brave enough to take that risk, to speak truth into the careful pretense of their friendship, and now Ryan had to decide what to do with that gift. Not tonight. Tonight he was still processing, still trying to understand the shape of his own feelings. But soon. Tomorrow maybe, or the day after. Soon he would have to be as brave as Maya had been. Soon he would have to decide if the possibility of happiness was worth the guaranteed presence of fear. Ryan turned off the lights and went to bed, but sleep didn't come easily. He lay in the dark, listening to Emma breathe through the baby monitor, aware of Maya's presence on the other side of the wall. So close, and suddenly so far away. In the morning, he knew, everything would be different. The question was whether different meant better or just another kind of loss, and whether he had the courage to find out. Sunday morning arrived with the kind of gray autumn light that made everything look washed out and uncertain. Ryan woke before his alarm, which meant he'd barely slept at all, his mind churning through the previous evening's events in an endless loop. He could hear Emma already awake in her room, talking to her stuffed animals in the elaborate narrative voice she used when directing their imaginary adventures. He should get up, make breakfast, maintain the routine that had kept their lives stable for 5 years. But instead, Ryan lay there, staring at the ceiling, thinking about the fact that Maya was on the other side of that wall, and he had absolutely no idea what to say to her. The knock he'd been half expecting, half dreading, never came. 9 o'clock passed without the familiar sound of Maya's knuckles on his door, without the routine that had defined their Sunday mornings for 18 months. The silence felt deliberate, like a presence in itself, and Ryan understood that she was giving him space, or maybe protecting herself. Probably both. "Daddy, I'm hungry," Emma announced, appearing in his doorway with her elephant tucked under one arm. "Can we have pancakes?" "Sure, sweetheart," Ryan said, forcing himself out of bed and into the performance of normalcy. Pancakes sound perfect. They ate breakfast together at the small kitchen table, Emma chattering about the zoo she'd built the night before, and her plans to add a penguin exhibit using her winter clothes as ice. Ryan listened and responded appropriately, but part of his attention kept drifting to the wall that separated his apartment from Maya's, wondering what she was doing, whether she regretted her confession, whether their friendship had been irrevocably damaged by honesty. After breakfast, while Emma was absorbed in her penguin construction project, Ryan stood at his kitchen counter with his phone in his hand, staring at Maya's contact information. He could text her, ask if she wanted to talk. But what would he even say? He didn't have answers yet. Didn't know what he wanted or what he was capable of offering. All he had was confusion and the growing awareness that her absence from his morning felt wrong in a way he couldn't ignore. The day passed slowly. Ryan took Emma to the park, pushed her on the swings, watched her play with other kids while he sat on a bench trying not to obsessively check his phone. They got groceries, made dinner together, watched a nature documentary about ocean ecosystems that Emma found fascinating and Ryan barely processed. Through it all, he was aware of the conversation waiting to happen, the words that needed to be spoken, the decision that couldn't be postponed indefinitely. By the time Emma was in bed, Ryan had worked himself into a state of controlled anxiety that felt almost familiar. This was the emotional territory he'd inhabited after Jen left. This sense of standing on the edge of something vast and uncertain, knowing a choice had to be made but terrified of making the wrong one. He stood at his door for a full minute before opening it and stepping into the hallway. Maya's apartment was lit, which meant she was home, probably awake. Ryan raised his hand to knock, then lowered it, then raised it again, feeling ridiculous and 17 and completely out of his depth. Before he could decide, Maya's door opened. She stood there in jeans and a sweater, her hair down around her shoulders, her expression carefully neutral. "I heard you pacing," she said quietly. "The walls are thin." "I wasn't pacing. I was thinking." "You think loudly." There was no humor in her voice, just exhaustion. "Do you want to come in?" Ryan nodded, not trusting his voice. He followed her into her apartment, which was neater than his but decorated with the same budget-conscious furniture and personal touches that made it feel like a home. They'd spent time here before, though less frequently than his place. Emma's presence made his apartment the natural gathering spot. But Ryan had been here enough to feel familiar with it, to know that Maya kept her books alphabetized and her kitchen impeccably organized, and had a collection of running medals displayed on one wall that spoke to a discipline he admired. They sat on her couch with careful space between them, the kind of distance that acknowledged the changed nature of their relationship. "I'm sorry," Ryan said finally, because it seemed like the only place to start, "for how I reacted yesterday, for just leaving like that." "You had a date," Maya replied, her voice even. "I ambushed you right before you had to leave. The timing was terrible. I knew that when I did it." "Why did you tell me then?" She was quiet for a moment, looking down at her hands. "Because watching you get ready to meet someone else made me realize I couldn't keep pretending anymore. I told myself I was okay with just being your friend, that it was enough to be part of your life in whatever capacity you'd allow. But seeing you care about how you looked for another woman, seeing you nervous and hopeful about the possibility of connecting with someone new, it broke something in me. I couldn't keep the secret anymore. It felt like lying." Ryan absorbed this, trying to understand the courage it must have taken to speak that truth. "How long have you felt this way?" "Honestly, I don't know exactly when it started. Maybe the day I moved in and you helped me with that ridiculous bookshelf. Maybe the first time Emma fell asleep on my couch during a movie and you carried her home so gently, like she was made of glass. Maybe it was gradual, accumulating over months of coffee and conversation and realizing I was happier in your presence than anywhere else." She looked at him then, her eyes dark and honest. "Does it matter when it started? What matters is that it exists, and now you know about it, and we have to figure out what to do with that information." "What do you want to do with it?" "That's not a fair question, Ryan. You know what I want. I told you what I want. The question is what you want, and whether you're capable of letting yourself want it." He flinched at the accuracy of her assessment. "You think I'm not capable?" "I think you're terrified," Maya said, and there was compassion in her voice rather than accusation. "I think what Jen did hurt you so badly that you've built your entire life around making sure you're never that vulnerable again. I think you love Emma so completely that the idea of bringing someone else into her world, someone who might leave and hurt her the way her mother did, feels unconscionable to you. And I think all of that is completely understandable and also completely unsustainable." "What do you mean, unsustainable?" "I mean, you can't protect Emma from every possible hurt by refusing to let anyone in. You can't model healthy relationships for her if you refuse to have relationships. And you can't live your entire life in a holding pattern, waiting for her to grow up so you can finally let yourself want things again." Maya's voice was gentle but firm. "She's 7, Ryan. You're planning to live like this for another 11 years? More, if we're being realistic about when kids actually become independent adults?" Ryan felt the words land like physical blows, not because they were cruel, but because they were true. "I just want her to be safe." "Safe from what? From seeing her father be happy? From learning that love is worth the risk even though it sometimes ends? From understanding that people can choose to stay even when staying is hard?" Maya leaned forward, her eyes searching his face. "You're so focused on protecting her from abandonment that you're teaching her to be alone. Is that really what you want for her?" "That's not fair." "Maybe not, but it's honest, which is more than we've been with each other for 18 months. The silence that followed was heavy with things unsaid, years of careful distance suddenly rendered transparent. Ryan thought about all the times Maya had been there, for Emma's birthday parties, for the parent-teacher conference when he'd been anxious about Emma's reading level, for the week when he'd had the flu and she'd brought him soup and entertained Emma with stories about physical therapy patients who'd recovered from seemingly impossible injuries. She hadn't just been his neighbor or his friend. She'd been present in ways that mattered, integrated into their lives so naturally that he'd stopped noticing when she'd become essential. "How did the date go?" Maya asked, breaking the silence. "Fine. She was nice. We're not going to see each other again." "Because of what I said?" Ryan shook his head. "Because I spent the entire evening thinking about you. Because sitting across from someone new made me realize I didn't want someone new. Because—" He stopped, the words catching in his throat. "Because what?" "Because I've been lying to myself," he admitted quietly. "About what you mean to me. About what I want. About whether I'm actually protecting Emma or just protecting myself from having to risk anything." Maya was very still, waiting. Ryan could see the hope in her eyes, carefully controlled but present, and it terrified him how much he wanted to meet that hope with something real. "I don't know how to do this," he said. "I don't know how to be in a relationship anymore. I don't know how to let someone matter without being constantly afraid they'll leave. And I don't know how to explain any of this to Emma in a way that doesn't confuse her or make her worry or—" "Ryan," Maya interrupted gently, "I'm not asking you to have everything figured out. I'm not asking for promises or certainties or a detailed plan for the future. I'm just asking if you're willing to try. To be honest about what we both feel and see if there's something here worth exploring. What if it doesn't work? Then it doesn't work, and we deal with that if it happens. But what if it does? What if the person you've been looking for has been right here all along, and the only thing stopping you from being happy is your own fear?" It was the same thought Ryan had had the night before, lying in bed unable to sleep. The possibility that happiness had been sitting next to him on his couch for 18 months, watching movies and drinking coffee, and waiting for him to be brave enough to see it. "Emma likes you," he said, which felt both relevant and completely inadequate. "I like her too. She's remarkable. Curious and kind and exactly the person you'd hope a 7-year-old would be. She asks about you when you're not around. Wants to know if you're coming over for movie night, whether you'll be at her next school event. She already sees you as part of her life." "And that scares you?" "Terrifies me," Ryan confirmed. "Because if this doesn't work, I'm not the only one who loses you. She does too, and I don't know if I can risk that for her." Maya was quiet for a long moment, and Ryan could see her processing this, weighing her response. When she spoke, her voice was measured and serious. "I understand that concern. I do. But Ryan, I'm already part of her life. Whether we're romantically involved or just neighbors, I care about Emma. If our friendship ended tomorrow for any reason, she'd feel that loss. The risk isn't whether she gets attached to me. She already is attached to me. The risk is whether we let fear make our decisions or whether we trust ourselves and each other enough to build something real." "You make it sound simple." "It's not simple. Nothing worth having is simple. But it is a choice, and right now you're choosing fear over possibility. You're choosing the certainty of loneliness over the chance of happiness, and I can't make that choice for you." Ryan looked at her, really looked at her, and saw not just the woman who'd moved in 18 months ago, but all the moments since. Maya laughing at Emma's jokes, Maya falling asleep during movies, Maya showing up with coffee on mornings when he'd mentioned being tired. Maya being present and constant and there in ways he'd taken for granted, because allowing himself to recognize them as love would have required acknowledging his own capacity to love in return. "I'm scared," he said quietly. "I know. I don't want to hurt you, or Emma, or anyone. Life hurts sometimes, Ryan. That's not something you can prevent by refusing to participate in it. I don't know if I can be what you need. I need you to be honest. I need you to try. That's all. The rest we figure out together, or we don't figure out at all, but at least we'll know we gave it a real chance." The words settled between them, a challenge and an invitation, and a statement of such simple truth that Ryan couldn't find an argument against it. He thought about Rebecca's comment the night before. Whoever has you this distracted is very lucky, whether they know it or not, and realized that Maya wasn't lucky. She was brave. Braver than him, certainly, because she'd spoken her truth, knowing it might not be returned, knowing it might end their friendship, knowing the risk and taking it anyway. "Okay," he heard himself say. Maya's expression shifted, hope breaking through the careful control. "Okay? Okay, let's try. I don't know what that looks like or how to do this, but you're right that choosing fear is just another way of choosing to be alone, and I'm tired of being alone. The admission felt like shedding weight, acknowledging something he'd been carrying for so long he'd forgotten it was there. I care about you, Maya, more than I've let myself admit, and the thought of you not being in my life, of not having coffee with you on Sunday mornings or watching you fall asleep during movies or listening to you talk about your patients like they're the most fascinating people in the world, that thought bothers me more than the fear of trying. She smiled then, the first real smile he'd seen from her since Friday night, and Ryan felt something loosen in his chest. So what now? He asked. Now we take it slow. We spend time together intentionally instead of accidentally. We're honest about what we're feeling and what we need. We make sure Emma understands what's happening in age-appropriate ways. We don't rush anything or force anything or pretend we have it all figured out. Maya reached across the space between them and took his hand, the first deliberately romantic gesture between them. We just try, Ryan. That's all. We try and we see what happens. Her hand in his felt right in a way that should have been frightening, but somehow wasn't. Ryan looked down at their joined hands, hers smaller than his, her fingers calloused from her work, her grip firm and steady, and thought about all the times they'd sat on his couch with careful space between them, close but not touching, present but not connected. I should tell Emma, he said, before we do anything else. She should know what's happening. Agreed. How do you think she'll react? Honestly, I think she'll be thrilled. She's been asking why we don't all spend more time together, why you always go home at night, whether you might want to stay for breakfast sometime. Kids are more perceptive than we give them credit for. They are, Maya agreed, but they also need clarity. We should be clear with her about what this means, that we're trying something new, that nothing is guaranteed but we care about each other and about her. Ryan nodded, appreciating her thoughtfulness about Emma's emotional well-being. It was one of the things he'd noticed about Maya over the past 18 months, her genuine care for his daughter, the way she listened to Emma's stories with real attention, the way she never talked down to her but engaged with her curiosity as valid and important. Tomorrow, he said. I'll talk to her tomorrow after school, and then maybe, if she's okay with it, we could all have dinner together? Intentionally, as a first attempt at this. I'd like that. Maya squeezed his hand gently. And Ryan, thank you for being willing to try. I know it's not easy for you. Thank you for being patient while I figured it out, and for being brave enough to say something in the first place. If you hadn't told me how you felt, I might have kept hiding from this indefinitely. Well, I got tired of watching you be noble and alone when you could be happy instead. Sometimes someone has to be the one to speak the truth, even when it's terrifying. They sat there for a while longer, hands joined, talking about logistics and concerns and hopes, in the kind of honest conversation they should have been having months ago. Maya shared that she'd almost said something a dozen times before, moments when the words had been right there, ready to spill out. But she'd swallowed them back out of fear of disrupting what they had. Ryan admitted that he'd noticed her presence in his life becoming essential, but had deliberately refused to examine why, choosing comfortable denial over uncomfortable truth. It was nearly midnight when Ryan finally stood to leave, reluctant to break the connection, but aware that Emma would be awake early and he needed at least a few hours of sleep. Good night, Maya said at her door, and there was a question in her eyes, uncertainty about how to end this evening now that everything had changed. Ryan answered by leaning in and kissing her forehead, a gesture of affection that was deliberately gentle, deliberately chaste, deliberately meant to communicate care without rushing into anything they weren't ready for. Good night, he said against her skin. I'll text you tomorrow after I talk to Emma. He felt her nod, felt her hand squeeze his one more time before letting go, and then he was walking the few feet back to his own apartment, everything familiar and nothing the same. Inside, Ryan checked on Emma, who was deeply asleep with her elephant and what appeared to be several other stuffed animals that had joined the sleeping arrangement since bedtime. He stood in her doorway, watching her breathe, thinking about the conversation he'd need to have tomorrow, hoping he could find words that would help her understand without worrying her. In his own bed, Ryan lay awake not from anxiety, but from a strange sense of possibility he hadn't allowed himself to feel in years. Everything was uncertain. He didn't know if he and Maya would work as a couple, didn't know if he was capable of being in a relationship again, didn't know if opening his life to this kind of vulnerability would end in happiness or heartbreak. But for the first time since Jen left, Ryan was willing to find out. He was willing to try. And that felt like its own kind of courage, its own small victory over the fear that had defined his life for too long. Tomorrow he would talk to Emma. Tomorrow he would take the first real step toward something he'd been too afraid to want. Tomorrow he would choose possibility over protection and see where that choice led. Tonight, he fell asleep thinking about Maya's hand in his, about the conversation they'd had, about the way she'd looked at him when he'd said he was willing to try. And for the first time in years, the thought of tomorrow didn't fill him with anxiety about all the ways things could go wrong. Instead, it filled him with hope about all the ways they might go right. The conversation with Emma happened at the kitchen table on Monday afternoon, right after Ryan picked her up from school. She'd been talking nonstop about a project in art class involving tissue paper butterflies, her hands moving animatedly as she described the exact shade of purple she'd chosen for the wings. Ryan let her finish, let her energy fill the space between them before gently redirecting. Em, can we talk about something important for a minute? She looked up from the apple slices he'd put in front of her, her expression shifting to the solemn attention she gave to things she sensed mattered. Okay. Am I in trouble? No, sweetheart. Nothing like that. I just want to talk to you about Maya. Emma's face brightened immediately. Is she coming over tonight? Can we watch a movie? Maybe. But first I need to ask you something. How would you feel if Maya and I spent more time together? Not just as friends, but as something more than friends. There was a pause while Emma processed this, her 7-year-old mind working through the implications. Ryan watched her carefully, looking for signs of distress or confusion, ready to backtrack if needed. Like dating? Emma asked finally. Like how Zoe's dad dates that lady who brings cookies to school sometimes? Yes, like dating. Maya and I care about each other, and we want to see if we could be happy together, but that would mean some things might change, and I wanted to make sure you were okay with that before we did anything. Emma considered this, taking a bite of apple with the same thoughtful expression she used when working through math problems. Would she still come over for movies? Yes, probably more often, actually. Would she eat dinner with us? Sometimes, if that's okay with you. Would she leave like Mommy did? The question hit Ryan like a punch to the chest, the fear he'd been carrying suddenly spoken aloud by his daughter, in a voice that was trying very hard to sound casual and not quite succeeding. He reached across the table and took her small hand in his. I can't promise that nothing will ever change or that people will never leave, he said carefully, choosing honesty over false comfort. But I can tell you that Maya cares about you very much, and she's not the kind of person who makes promises she doesn't intend to keep. She's been our friend for a long time, and she wants to be part of our lives in a bigger way. That doesn't mean everything will be perfect, but it does mean she's choosing to be here. Do you love her? Emma asked, her eyes searching his face with the directness only children possessed. Ryan took a breath, recognizing the weight of the question. I think I might. I'm still figuring that out, but I care about her a lot, and I'm happy when she's around. Aren't you? Emma nodded enthusiastically. She's nice, and she's funny, and she doesn't treat me like a baby, and she knows a lot about penguins. She does know a lot about penguins, Ryan agreed, remembering a lengthy discussion about Antarctic wildlife that had happened during one of their movie nights. So you'd be okay if she and I tried being more than friends? Does that mean she might stay for breakfast sometimes? It might mean that, yes. Emma grinned, the expression pure and uncomplicated in the way only children's joy could be. Then yes, I want her to stay for breakfast. Can she come over tonight? Relief flooded through Ryan, mixed with a tenderness for his daughter's easy acceptance of the possibility of happiness. I'll ask her. And Em, if you ever feel worried or confused about any of this, you can always talk to me. Always. Your feelings matter, and I need to know if something's bothering you. Okay, Daddy. She paused, then added with the kind of insight that constantly surprised him. I think Maya makes you smile more. You should smile more. You're pretty wise for 7 years old, you know that? I know, Emma said matter-of-factly, returning to her apple slices. Can I go work on my butterfly now? Ryan watched her slide off her chair and head to her room, her acceptance of the situation so straightforward it made his own months of anxiety seem almost absurd. Children, he thought, understood things adults complicated. Maya made him happy. That was enough for Emma. Maybe it could be enough for him too. He texted Maya while Emma was occupied with her art project, his fingers hovering over the keyboard before he finally typed out the message. Talk to Emma. She's excited. Wants to know if you can come for dinner tonight. The response came quickly. How excited are we talking? She asked if you could stay for breakfast. That's pretty excited. What did you tell her? That I'd ask you, so I'm asking. Dinner tonight? Fair warning, it's probably going to be spaghetti because that's what we have, and I'm not a sophisticated cook. Spaghetti sounds perfect. What time? 6? Emma's bedtime is 8, so we'd have time to talk after if you want. I want. I'll bring dessert. Ryan set his phone down with a smile he couldn't quite suppress, then immediately felt self-conscious about how much that simple exchange had pleased him. This was new territory, this allowing himself to feel good about something uncertain, this choosing hope over the protective cynicism he'd cultivated for years. Dinner was chaotic in the best way. Emma insisted on helping cook, which meant the kitchen ended up splattered with tomato sauce and the garlic bread was slightly burned on one side, but the energy in the apartment felt different than usual. Lighter, somehow. When Maya arrived at 6 with a container of brownies and a bottle of wine, Emma launched herself at her with a hug that spoke volumes about how much she'd already integrated Maya into the category of people who mattered. Dad said you might stay for breakfast sometimes, Emma announced before Maya had even set down the dessert. Maya glanced at Ryan with raised eyebrows and barely concealed amusement. Did he now? I said might, Ryan clarified, feeling his face warm. Emphasis on might, and only if you wanted to, no pressure. I like breakfast, Maya said to Emma seriously. Especially pancakes. Does your dad make good pancakes? The best, Emma declared with absolute confidence. He puts chocolate chips in them. Well, that's impressive. I might have to stay for breakfast just to verify this claim. They ate at the small kitchen table, Emma dominating the conversation with stories about school and her butterfly project, and an elaborate plan she'd developed for teaching her stuffed animals synchronized swimming in the bathtub. Maya listened with genuine interest, asking questions that showed she was actually paying attention, and Ryan found himself watching the two of them interact with something that felt dangerously close to contentment. This could work, he thought. This could actually work. After dinner, Emma requested a movie, and they settled onto the couch in what had become their familiar arrangement, except now Ryan was acutely aware of Maya's presence beside him in a way he hadn't been before. She'd kicked off her shoes and tucked her feet under her, close enough that their shoulders touched, and that small point of contact felt significant in ways that both thrilled and terrified him. Emma made it through about half of the animated film about a lost dog before her eyes started drooping. She fought it valiantly, insisting she wasn't tired even as she yawned, until finally she curled up with her head on Ryan's lap and surrendered to sleep. She really tried, Maya whispered, her voice soft with affection. She always does. Bedtime is her nemesis. Ryan carefully extracted himself from under Emma's head, replacing his lap with a pillow, and scooped her up. I'll be right back. He carried Emma to her room, tucked her in with her elephant and the growing collection of animals that seemed to migrate to her bed nightly, and stood in the doorway for a moment watching her sleep. This was what mattered. This small person who trusted him completely, who'd accepted Maya into their lives with such easy grace, who deserved to see her father be happy and whole and present. When he returned to the living room, Maya had paused the movie and was standing by the window looking out at the parking lot below. She turned when she heard him, and something in her expression made Ryan's breath catch. She's wonderful, Maya said quietly. You've done an amazing job with her. She makes it easy. Most of the time, anyway. Ryan moved to stand beside her, their reflections ghostly in the dark window. Thank you for being so good with her, for caring about her. It's not hard to care about Emma. She's genuine and curious and kind. Those are rare qualities, especially in someone so young. You should be proud. I am. He turned to face her fully. And I'm grateful for tonight. for being patient with all of this. I know it's not exactly a conventional situation. Maya smiled, a soft expression that made her eyes warm. I don't need conventional, Ryan. I need real. And this feels real in a way nothing has in a long time. Yeah, he agreed, the word barely more than a breath. It does. They stood there in the quiet apartment, the only sounds the distant hum of traffic outside and the soft tick of the clock on the wall. Ryan was aware of how close they were standing, of the way Maya was looking at him, of the fact that they were alone now, and this was the moment where things could shift from possibility to reality. I don't really know what I'm doing, he admitted. It's been 5 years since I've tried to be in a relationship, and even before that I wasn't particularly good at it. I don't think anyone's particularly good at it, Maya said. I think we're all just trying to figure it out as we go, hoping we don't mess it up too badly. That's not very reassuring. No, but it's honest. She reached up and touched his face, her fingers gentle against his jaw. I don't need you to be perfect, Ryan. I need you to be here, present, willing to try even when it's scary. Can you do that? He covered her hand with his, holding it against his face. I can try. Then that's enough. Ryan kissed her then, finally closing the distance he'd been maintaining for 18 months. It was tentative at first, careful, both of them feeling their way into this new dynamic. But then Maya's arms went around his neck and he pulled her closer, and it stopped being tentative and became something else entirely. Something that felt like coming home and jumping off a cliff simultaneously, terrifying and right in equal measure. When they finally broke apart, both slightly breathless, Maya rested her forehead against his and laughed softly. What? Ryan asked. I've been imagining that for months. The reality is much better. Good to know I exceeded expectations. Don't let it go to your head. They moved back to the couch, this time without the careful distance. Maya curled against his side with his arm around her shoulders. It felt natural in a way Ryan hadn't anticipated, like they'd been doing this for years rather than minutes. Can I ask you something? Maya said after a while. Anything. What changed? Between Friday night when you left for your date and Sunday when you came to my apartment ready to try. What shifted for you? Ryan thought about how to answer, trying to articulate something he wasn't entirely sure he understood himself. I think I realized that I'd been using Emma as an excuse, telling myself I was protecting her by not getting involved with anyone, when really, I was protecting myself. And then I thought about what you said, about whether I wanted to model isolation for her or teach her that love was worth the risk. That hit hard. I wasn't trying to guilt you. I know. But you were right. I can't spend the next decade hiding from the possibility of happiness and expect Emma to grow up believing relationships are something worth having. And more than that, I realized I didn't want to spend the next decade hiding. I was lonely, Maya. So lonely I'd almost convinced myself it was normal, that it was just the cost of being a single parent. But then you weren't at my door Sunday morning, and I felt that absence like a physical thing, and I understood that loneliness wasn't normal. It was just what I'd accepted because I was too scared to want anything else. Maya was quiet, her fingers tracing absent patterns on his arm. I was lonely too, she said finally, before I moved here. After my divorce, I convinced myself I was better off alone, that I'd tried the relationship thing and it hadn't worked, and maybe I just wasn't built for it. And then I met you and Emma, and suddenly alone didn't feel like safety anymore. It felt like missing out. You were married? Ryan asked, surprised. In 18 months of conversation, Maya had never mentioned a divorce. For 3 years. It ended about 6 months before I moved to Riverside Drive. He was a good person. We just wanted different things. He wanted to stay in Oregon near his family, wanted kids right away, wanted a life I wasn't ready for. I wanted to move, to focus on my career, to figure out who I was outside of being someone's wife. We tried to make it work, but eventually we both had to admit that loving someone doesn't always mean you're right for each other. I'm sorry. That must have been hard. It was. But it was also necessary, and it taught me that ending something that isn't working doesn't mean you've failed. Sometimes it just means you're being honest about what you need. She shifted to look up at him. I'm telling you this because I want you to know that I understand fear. I understand what it's like to have something fall apart and wonder if you should ever try again. But I also know that the alternative is worse. Being safe and alone is still being alone. Ryan tightened his arm around her, appreciating the vulnerability it took to share that history. Thank you for telling me. Thank you for being willing to hear it, and for being willing to try this despite being terrified. Who says I'm terrified? Maya laughed. Ryan, you're so terrified I can feel your heart racing from here, but you're doing it anyway, which is what courage actually is. They talked for another hour, the conversation ranging from serious to silly, touching on their pasts and their hopes and the logistics of what trying actually meant. They agreed to take things slowly, to be conscious of Emma's needs and feelings, to communicate openly even when it was uncomfortable. They acknowledged that this could fail, that there were no guarantees, but that the possibility of happiness was worth the risk of heartbreak. It was nearly midnight when Maya finally said she should go home, that they both had work in the morning and Emma would be up early. Ryan walked her to the door, reluctant to let the evening end, but knowing she was right. Same time tomorrow? He asked, and she nodded. Same time tomorrow. And Ryan? Thank you for tonight, for letting me in, for choosing to try. Thank you for waiting while I figured it out. She kissed him goodnight, a soft press of lips that promised more to come. And then she was gone, disappearing into her apartment with a last smile over her shoulder. Ryan stood in his doorway for a moment, processing the evening, the conversation, the shift that had occurred. Then he went inside, checked on Emma one more time, and got ready for bed with a lightness he hadn't felt in years. The next few weeks fell into a new rhythm, one that felt both familiar and entirely different. Maya still came over for dinner most nights, but now she stayed later, her presence shifting from guest to something more integrated into their daily life. They were careful around Emma, not wanting to overwhelm her with displays of affection she might not be ready for, but allowing themselves small gestures of connection, hands held under the dinner table, quick kisses in the kitchen when Emma was occupied, the casual intimacy of people learning to be together. Emma, for her part, seemed delighted by the arrangement. She started asking Maya about her day the same way she asked Ryan, including her in decisions about weekend activities, and occasionally requesting that Maya be the one to read bedtime stories because she did better voices for the animal characters. Work continued as normal, except now Ryan found himself texting Maya during lunch breaks, sharing small observations about his day, looking forward to the evening with an anticipation that made the warehouse shifts pass more quickly. Derek noticed the change immediately. You seem different, he'd commented one Thursday afternoon. Less brooding and intense. Did something happen? I took your advice, Ryan had said, about getting out more. Rebecca, I thought you said that didn't go anywhere. It didn't, but it made me realize something I'd been missing that was right in front of me. Derek had grinned knowingly. The neighbor, right? Sarah called it. She said there was something between you two the time she met you both in the parking lot. Apparently everyone could see it except me. That's usually how it goes. So it's good? You're happy? Ryan had considered the question, testing the emotion against his usual suspicion of positive feelings. Yeah, he'd said finally. I think I am. But happiness, Ryan was learning, didn't erase fear. It just gave you something worth being afraid for. 3 weeks into their new arrangement, he woke up at 2 a.m. in a full panic, his heart racing and his mind spinning through every possible catastrophe. What if Maya realized he was too damaged, too cautious, too limited by single parenthood? What if Emma got too attached and then Maya left? What if he was making a terrible mistake, letting someone in only to have history repeat itself? He'd gotten up, checked on Emma out of habit, then stood in his living room trying to breathe through the anxiety. That's where Maya found him 20 minutes later, having heard him pacing through the thin walls and come to investigate. Talk to me, she'd said, appearing in his doorway in pajama pants and an old t-shirt, her hair messy from sleep. What's going on? I don't know if I can do this, he'd admitted, the words tumbling out. I want to, but I don't know if I'm capable of it. What if I'm too broken? What if I can't give you what you need? What if Emma gets hurt because I made a selfish choice? Maya had crossed to him, taken his hands, and met his eyes with steady certainty. Ryan, listen to me. You're not broken. You're careful, which is different. You've been hurt, which is understandable. And you're afraid, which is human. But none of that means you can't do this. It just means you're doing it scared, which is fine. I'm scared too. You don't seem scared. Because I'm better at hiding it. But I wake up sometimes wondering if I'm putting too much pressure on this, if I'm expecting too much. If the reality of being with someone who has a child will be harder than I'm imagining. Fear doesn't mean we're making a mistake. It just means we're risking something that matters. They'd talked through the night, Ryan voicing fears he hadn't known he was carrying, and Maya meeting each one with patience and honesty. She didn't promise that nothing would go wrong. She didn't offer guarantees or certainties or easy answers. She just reminded him that they were in this together, that fear was part of the process, and that running from it now would only teach Emma that love was something to avoid rather than something to choose even when it was hard. By the time the sun came up, Ryan felt steadier. Not certain, he didn't think he'd ever feel certain about this, but willing to keep trying. Willing to trust that Maya meant what she said when she promised to stay, to communicate, to work through the hard parts rather than running from them. The weeks turned into a month, then 2. The routines deepened. Maya started keeping clothes at Ryan's apartment for the nights she stayed late. They took Emma to the zoo on a Saturday, the 3 of them wandering through exhibits while Emma provided commentary on the animals' private lives. They had their first argument about something stupid, whether to watch an action movie or a comedy, and learned how to disagree without it becoming catastrophic. They figured out how to balance time together and time apart, how to be present for Emma while also making space for their own relationship, how to navigate the complicated reality of building something new while honoring the life Ryan had already established. It wasn't always easy. There were moments when Ryan's fear spiked, when he pulled back without meaning to, when the old instinct to protect himself through distance tried to reassert control. But each time, Maya called him on it gently, and they talked through it, and slowly Ryan learned that conflict didn't mean ending, that difficulty didn't equal failure, that staying through the hard conversations was what separated real relationships from the fantasy of easy ones. And gradually, almost without noticing when it happened, Ryan realized he'd stopped waiting for Maya to leave. He'd stopped bracing for abandonment, stopped testing her commitment, stopped treating their relationship like something temporary that would inevitably end. She'd become integrated into his life, into Emma's life, in ways that felt permanent, not because anyone had made promises, but because she kept choosing to be there, day after day, through good moods and bad, through easy times and difficult ones. It was Emma who finally said what Ryan had been feeling but hadn't known how to articulate. They'd been having breakfast one Sunday morning, the 3 of them at the kitchen table with pancakes and fruit, and Emma had looked up from her chocolate chip-studded breakfast and announced, "I think we're a family now." Ryan had frozen, his coffee cup halfway to his mouth. Maya had gone very still. "What makes you say that, sweetheart?" Ryan had asked carefully. Emma had shrugged, the gesture suggesting the answer was obvious. "Maya's here all the time. She knows how I like my sandwiches cut. She has her own toothbrush in our bathroom. And you smile at her the way Mr. Rodriguez smiles at Mrs. Rodriguez, and they've been married forever, so I think we're a family." Ryan had looked at Maya across the table, seeing his own emotion reflected in her eyes. They hadn't discussed labels, hadn't defined what they were beyond trying, but Emma had done it for them with the straightforward logic of childhood. "Is that okay with you?" Maya had asked Emma gently. "Us being a family?" "Yes," Emma had said firmly. "I like it. Can I have more pancakes?" Just like that, with the request for more breakfast, the moment had passed for Emma. But for Ryan, it lingered. That word. Family. The concept he'd been so careful to protect, so cautious about expanding, had somehow grown to include Maya without him quite noticing when it happened. Later, after Emma had gone to her room to play, Ryan and Maya had found themselves back at the kitchen table, the breakfast dishes cleared, but neither of them quite ready to move on. "A family," Ryan had said quietly, testing the word. "Is that too much?" Maya had asked. "Too fast?" No, he'd realized, and meant it. It's not too much. It's just right. It's just true. Maya had reached across the table and taken his hand, her touch grounding him in the moment. "I love you," she'd said simply. "I should have said it before now, but I was waiting for the right time, and I'm realizing there's no such thing as the right time. There's just now and the truth, and I love you." I love Emma. I love the life we're building together. The words had settled over Ryan like sunlight breaking through clouds, warm and clarifying and somehow inevitable. He'd known it, of course, had felt it growing between them for weeks now, maybe longer, but hearing it spoken aloud made it real in a way that transformed everything. I love you too, he'd said, and the admission had felt less like a confession and more like recognition. I think I have for a while. I was just too scared to name it. And now? Now I'm still scared, he'd admitted honestly. But I'm more scared of losing this than I am of admitting I want it. They'd kissed across the breakfast table, maple syrup still sticky on the plates between them, and Ryan had felt something shift inside himself. Not the erasure of fear, he didn't think that would ever completely disappear, but the acceptance that love was worth being afraid for, that happiness didn't require certainty, that family could be something you chose to build rather than something that happened to you. The following weeks brought a deepening that Ryan hadn't anticipated. Maya's presence in their lives moved from intentional to essential, from something they were trying to something they simply were. She started attending Emma's school events not as a guest, but as family, sitting beside Ryan during the autumn concert where Emma played a surprisingly competent rendition of Hot Cross Buns on the recorder. She joined them for grocery shopping on Saturday mornings, developing opinions about which brand of pasta sauce was superior and playfully arguing with Ryan about the appropriate ratio of vegetables to snacks in Emma's lunchbox. Small decisions became shared decisions. When Emma wanted to sign up for soccer, they discussed it together over dinner, weighing the time commitment against Emma's genuine interest and deciding as a unit that, yes, they could make it work. When Ryan's car started making an ominous grinding noise, Maya was the one he called for advice, and she'd shown up at the mechanic with him, helping him navigate the confusing world of brake pads and transmission fluid with the kind of practical support he'd forgotten relationships could offer. But it was the quiet moments that surprised Ryan most. The way Maya would appear in the kitchen while he was making Emma's lunch and wordlessly start preparing coffee for both of them, their morning routine synchronized without discussion. The way she'd absently run her fingers through his hair when they were watching movies. The gesture so casual and familiar, it felt like they'd been doing it for years. The way she remembered that Emma liked her sandwiches cut diagonally, and that Ryan took his coffee with too much sugar, and that Thursdays were always harder for him because the warehouse was busiest then. It was the accumulation of attention, Ryan realized, the way Maya paid attention to their lives in ways that made them feel seen and valued and known. It was different from what he'd had with Jen, where love had felt like negotiation and compromise and constant effort to maintain something that was always slightly off balance. With Maya, it felt like partnership, like choosing each other every day, not out of obligation, but because the alternative, not choosing each other, was unthinkable. 3 months into their relationship, Ryan came home from work to find Maya and Emma in the living room, surrounded by construction paper, markers, and what appeared to be an ambitious attempt to create a three-dimensional model of the solar system. "We're making science," Emma announced proudly, holding up a partially completed Jupiter that was more glue than planet. "Maya said she'd help because you're terrible at art projects." "I never said terrible," Maya corrected, laughing. "I said I had more experience with crafts that involved precision, and your dad had more experience with crafts that involved enthusiasm." "That's a diplomatic way of saying I'm terrible at art projects," Ryan said, dropping his work bag and joining them on the floor. "What's the assignment?" "We have to present our favorite planet next week," Emma explained. "I chose Saturn because of the rings, but Maya says Jupiter is more interesting because of the storms." "I didn't say more interesting, I said equally interesting. Saturn's rings are magnificent, but Jupiter's great red spot is a storm that's been raging for hundreds of years. Both are worth celebrating." Ryan watched them work together, Emma's small hands carefully coloring while Maya guided the structural elements, and felt that now familiar surge of emotion that came from witnessing his daughter and the woman he loved finding joy in each other's company. This was what he'd denied himself for 5 years, this ease, this warmth, this sense of being part of something larger than his own careful solitude. Later that night, after Emma had gone to bed clutching her partially completed Saturn, Ryan and Maya sat on the couch in the comfortable silence that had become their favorite part of the evening. She had her feet tucked under her, a book open in her lap that she wasn't really reading, and Ryan was ostensibly reviewing work emails on his phone, but mostly just enjoying her presence. "I've been thinking," Maya said eventually, setting her book aside, "about the lease on my apartment." Ryan's attention sharpened immediately. "What about it?" "It's up for renewal next month. I need to decide if I'm staying or looking for something else." She paused, and Ryan could see her choosing her words carefully. "The thing is, I'm barely there anymore. Most of my stuff is here. I sleep here more nights than not, and Emma asked me last week why I still pay rent on a place I don't use." "She asked you that?" "She did. Very matter-of-fact about it, too. Wanted to know if I was wasting money, because apparently they're learning about budgeting in school, and she's become very concerned with financial responsibility." Ryan laughed despite the sudden nervousness tightening his chest. "That sounds like her. What did you tell her?" "I told her it was complicated, which she found unsatisfying, but it got me thinking about whether it needs to be complicated." Maya shifted to face him more fully. "I'm not trying to pressure you or force a decision you're not ready for, but I also don't see the point in maintaining 2 apartments when we're functionally living together already. So I wanted to ask what you thought about making it official, about me moving in here, if you and Emma are ready for that." The question hung in the air between them, heavy with implication and possibility. Ryan's first instinct was the familiar surge of panic, too fast, too much, too risky. But he forced himself to sit with the feeling instead of reacting to it, to actually consider what Maya was proposing instead of just responding to his own fear. The truth was, she was right. She was already here most of the time. Her toothbrush was in the bathroom, her clothes were in his closet, her favorite coffee was in the kitchen. Emma had stopped asking when Maya was coming over and started assuming she would be there. The apartment felt wrong on the rare nights Maya wasn't present, too quiet and too empty in ways that had nothing to do with physical space and everything to do with her absence. "I think Emma would be thrilled," Ryan said carefully. "She's been asking when you're going to bring the rest of your books over because she wants to reorganize our bookshelf by color, and apparently we don't have enough variety." "And what about you?" Maya's voice was gentle but direct. "What do you want?" Ryan met her eyes, seeing the vulnerability there, the hope she was trying to control. She was taking a risk asking this, putting herself out there again the way she had that night before his date with Rebecca. The least he could do was match her courage with honesty. "I want you here," he said. Not just visiting or staying over, but here, living here, sharing this space and this life with Emma and me. I want to stop thinking of your apartment as your home and start thinking of this as our home." He paused, making sure she understood his sincerity. "I'm not scared of you moving in, Maya. I'm scared of how much I want it, but that's different. That's good fear. The kind that means something matters." Her smile was luminous, relief and joy combined. "Good fear, I like that distinction. So yes, move in, please. Let's make this official." They sealed the decision with a kiss that started tender and became something more, the kind of connection that still surprised Ryan with its intensity. When they finally broke apart, Maya was laughing softly. "What?" Ryan asked. "I'm just imagining Emma's reaction when we tell her. She's going to start planning where everything should go immediately. She's definitely going to have opinions about furniture arrangement. And we're going to listen to all of them very seriously, and then probably do what we were planning anyway." That's good parenting right there. They told Emma the next morning over pancakes, which had become their traditional venue for important conversations. Emma's reaction was exactly what Ryan had predicted: immediate excitement followed by a detailed interrogation about logistics. "So you're moving all your stuff here?" Emma asked Maya, her eyes bright with interest. "That's the plan. It'll take a few trips, but yes, everything from my apartment will come here." "Even your medals? And your big bookshelf? And that picture of the mountains you have in your living room?" "All of it. Though we might need to figure out where things will fit." Emma nodded seriously, already planning. "We could put the mountain picture in the hallway, and your bookshelf could go in the living room next to Dad's. And maybe we could rearrange my room to make space for more of your stuff, because I want to keep some of it with me." Ryan and Maya exchanged glances over Emma's head, both touched by her desire to integrate Maya's possessions into her own space. "We'll figure it out together," Ryan assured her. "All 3 of us. This is our home now, which means we all get to decide how it looks and feels." Can we paint my room? Emma asked, seizing the opportunity. I've wanted purple walls forever. Let's start with the moving and see how we feel about painting projects after that, Ryan said diplomatically, and Emma accepted this with the philosophical shrug of a child who knew when to push and when to wait. The actual moving process took 2 weekends and involved more coordination than Ryan had anticipated. Maya's apartment, while smaller than his, had accumulated a surprising amount of belongings over 18 months. They packed boxes, ferried loads across the hallway, and slowly transformed Ryan's space into something that belonged to all of them rather than just him and Emma. The bookshelf integration became a major project, with Emma insisting on organizing by color despite Ryan's protests that alphabetical by author made more sense. They compromised by doing both, alphabetical within each color grouping, which satisfied no one but made everyone feel heard. Maya's mountain photograph did indeed go in the hallway, and her collection of running medals found a home on a shelf in the bedroom she now shared with Ryan. That transition, sharing a bedroom, sharing a bed every night instead of just sometimes, brought its own adjustment. Ryan had gotten used to having his own space, to sprawling across the mattress however he wanted, to falling asleep and waking up alone. Now there was another person there, warm and present and real. Maya's sleep habits were different from his. She read before bed while he preferred to fall asleep immediately. She woke up slowly while he came to consciousness all at once. She stole blankets in the night, and he apparently talked in his sleep occasionally, something she found endlessly amusing. But they learned each other's rhythms, made accommodations, and discovered that the intimacy of shared sleep was worth the minor inconveniences. Ryan found he actually slept better with Maya there, the sound of her breathing a comfort rather than a disturbance. And waking up to her face on the pillow beside him felt like a gift he received every morning, a daily reminder that he'd chosen happiness over safety and it had turned out okay. Work continued as normal, except now Ryan came home to a house that felt full rather than merely occupied. Maya's job at County General meant her hours were sometimes irregular, and they had to coordinate schedules around Emma's school and activities, but they managed it with the kind of teamwork that came from actually wanting to solve problems together. Derek noticed the change in Ryan's demeanor immediately, commenting that he seemed lighter somehow, less like he was carrying the weight of the world alone. Turns out having a partner makes life easier, Ryan had said. Who knew? Everyone except you, apparently, Derek had replied with a grin. Sarah's pleased with herself for being right about you and Maya. She's demanding credit for your happiness. She can have it. I'm not proud. Tell her I said thank you for noticing what I was too stubborn to see. 4 months into living together, they hit their first major conflict. Not about anything dramatic or relationship-threatening, but about something mundane that somehow triggered deeper tensions. Maya had rearranged the kitchen without asking, moving things to locations she considered more logical based on frequency of use. Ryan had come home exhausted from a difficult day at work to find nothing where he expected it, and his frustration had spilled over into anger that had more to do with feeling like he'd lost control of his own space than with the actual organization of cabinets. You could have asked, he'd said, his tone sharper than intended. This is my kitchen. I've had things organized a certain way for 5 years. It's our kitchen now, Maya had replied, her own frustration evident. And your way wasn't logical. The mugs were in the cabinet farthest from the coffee maker, the spices were nowhere near the stove, and the Tupperware was such a disaster it took 10 minutes to find a matching lid. Maybe I liked it that way. No, you didn't. You complained about not being able to find things constantly. I was trying to help. I didn't ask for help. I asked for you to live here with me, not to change everything without discussion. The argument had escalated from there, both of them saying things that had more to do with fear and adjustment than with kitchen organization. Ryan accused Maya of trying to take over his life. She accused him of refusing to fully let her in, of still treating the apartment like it was his space that she was just borrowing. They'd gone to bed angry that night, lying on opposite sides of the mattress in stubborn silence. Emma had noticed the tension at breakfast the next morning, her eyes moving between them with the worried expression children got when the adults in their lives were fighting. Are you guys okay? She'd asked quietly, and Ryan had felt shame wash over him at the concern in her voice. We're fine, sweetheart, he'd said, forcing a reassuring smile. Maya and I just had a disagreement last night about some boring adult stuff. It's nothing for you to worry about. But Emma wasn't fooled. Mrs. Chen says that when people who love each other fight, they're supposed to talk about it and say sorry and fix it. Are you going to fix it? Out of the mouths of 7-year-olds, Ryan thought. Wisdom delivered with the blunt efficiency of someone too young to understand the complicated pride that made adults resist apologizing even when they knew they should. After dropping Emma at school, Ryan had driven to work replaying the argument in his mind, recognizing his own overreaction, understanding that his anger had been less about cabinets and more about the vulnerability of sharing space after years of maintaining complete control. He'd texted Maya during his lunch break. "I'm sorry about last night. Can we talk when I get home?" Her response had come quickly. "I'm sorry too. Yes, let's talk." The conversation that evening, after Emma was in bed, had been difficult but necessary. Ryan had admitted that the kitchen reorganization had triggered his fear of losing autonomy, of being overwhelmed by someone else's presence in his carefully controlled life. Maya had acknowledged that she'd overstepped, that she should have discussed the changes with him first instead of assuming her way was better. "I don't want to erase you from your own home," she'd said, "but I also don't want to feel like a guest in the place I live. I need this to actually be our space, not just your space that I'm occupying." "You're right," Ryan had agreed. "I've been holding on to control because it feels safe, but that's not fair to you. We need to make decisions together, even about small things like kitchen cabinets, especially about small things, because that's how we practice being partners." They'd established some ground rules after that. Major changes required discussion. Minor adjustments could happen, but should be mentioned. Disagreements would be addressed directly rather than left to fester. And neither of them would go to bed angry, even if that meant staying up late to work through difficult conversations. The resolution didn't erase the conflict, but it gave them a framework for handling future ones. And it taught Ryan that disagreement didn't mean disaster, that working through tension actually strengthened their relationship rather than weakening it. The kitchen stayed reorganized, and Ryan grudgingly admitted after a week that Maya's system actually did make more sense. She'd smiled with satisfaction, but had the grace not to say, "I told you so." Emma's 8th birthday arrived in November, and planning the celebration became a family project. Emma wanted a party at the apartment with her classmates, which meant coordinating with multiple parents, planning activities that would keep 10 8-year-olds entertained for 3 hours, and somehow not destroying their home in the process. Maya had taken charge of the planning with an efficiency that impressed Ryan, creating schedules and backup plans and a detailed shopping list that accounted for dietary restrictions he hadn't even thought to ask about. On the day of the party, she was everywhere at once, greeting parents, organizing games, mediating disputes between children, and somehow keeping everything running smoothly while also making it look effortless. Ryan watched her from the kitchen where he was refilling juice cups and felt a surge of gratitude so intense it was almost overwhelming. This woman who'd moved in next door 18 months ago had become essential to his life in ways he couldn't have imagined. She wasn't just his partner. She was Emma's advocate, their household organizer, the person who remembered to buy birthday candles and send thank you notes and coordinate with other parents about carpooling to soccer practice. Later, after the last guest had been picked up and Emma was crashed on the couch in a sugar-induced haze of happiness, Ryan found Maya in the kitchen surveying the chaos of dirty dishes and discarded decorations. "You're amazing," he said, wrapping his arms around her from behind. "Did I mention that? You're absolutely amazing." She leaned back against him, tired but satisfied. "It was a good party. Emma had fun." "She had the best time, and that's because of you. The planning, the execution, all of it. I would have just ordered pizza and called it good. Pizza would have been fine, too. But she's only ate once, and she deserved something special." Ryan turned her to face him, needing her to see his sincerity. "Thank you for caring about her the way you do, for showing up for both of us in ways I didn't know we needed, for being exactly who you are." Maya smiled, reaching up to touch his face with flour-dusted fingers from the cake they'd served. "That's the thing, though. This isn't a sacrifice for me. I'm not showing up out of obligation or trying to prove something. I genuinely love being here. I love Emma. I love our life together. This is exactly where I want to be." They stood there in the messy kitchen, surrounded by the evidence of a successful party and a life being actively lived, and Ryan thought about how far he'd come from that night when Maya had confessed her feelings. How terrified he'd been then, how certain that opening himself to love would end in disaster. And maybe it still would. Maybe there were difficulties ahead they couldn't anticipate, challenges that would test them in ways they weren't ready for. But standing here with Maya in his arms, with Emma dozing happily in the next room, with a home that finally felt like it belonged to all of them, Ryan understood that the risk had been worth it. Love wasn't safe, it wasn't guaranteed, but it was real. And it was here, and he'd almost missed it by being too afraid to try. The real test came in February, 6 months after Maya had moved in, when Emma's school called during Ryan's shift at the warehouse. The nurse's voice had been calm but firm, explaining that Emma had fallen during recess and hit her head, that she was conscious and alert, but they wanted her checked out at the hospital as a precaution, that someone needed to come get her immediately. Ryan's hands had shaken as he'd grabbed his keys, called his supervisor to explain the emergency, and driven to Willow Creek Elementary with his heart in his throat. Every worst-case scenario played through his mind in vivid detail, the kind of catastrophic thinking that came from being the sole person responsible for another human's well-being for so long that the fear of something happening to them never quite went away. He'd called Maya from the parking lot, his voice unsteady. "Emma fell at school. They're saying we need to take her to the hospital. I'm about to go in and get her." "I'm leaving work now," Maya had said immediately, no hesitation. "Which hospital?" "County General, probably. That's closest." "I'll meet you there." "Ryan, she's going to be okay. Kids fall all the time, and the school is just being cautious. Try not to panic." But Ryan was already panicking, had been panicking since the phone rang, the old familiar terror of being alone in a crisis rising up despite the fact that he wasn't alone anymore. He'd rushed into the school, found Emma sitting in the nurse's office with an ice pack pressed to her forehead, looking small and scared and trying very hard to be brave. "Hey, sweetheart," he'd said, kneeling in front of her and gently moving her hair to see the bump forming above her eyebrow. "How are you feeling?" "My head hurts," Emma had said, her voice wavering. "And I'm dizzy. I didn't mean to fall, Daddy. I was just playing and then I tripped and everything went sideways." "I know, baby. It's okay. We're going to go to the hospital and have a doctor look at you, make sure everything's all right." The nurse had given him the accident report and her observations, mentioning that Emma had been briefly unconscious, which was why they were recommending the ER visit. Ryan had felt his stomach drop at the word unconscious, his mind immediately jumping to concussions and brain injuries and all the terrible possibilities that came with head trauma. The drive to County General had been careful and slow, Ryan checking the rear-view mirror constantly to watch Emma in the back seat, asking her questions to make sure she was staying alert. She'd answered them all, telling him about her day and the game they'd been playing when she fell, her voice growing quieter as exhaustion set in. Maya had been waiting at the emergency room entrance when they arrived, still in her work clothes, her face tight with concern. She'd helped Emma out of the car while Ryan parked, and by the time he'd caught up to them inside, Maya had already gotten them checked in and was sitting with Emma in the waiting area, keeping her awake and engaged with questions about her favorite animals. The relief Ryan felt at seeing her there, at not having to handle this alone, was so intense it nearly brought him to his knees. He sank into the chair beside them, reaching for Maya's hand without thinking about it. "Thank you for coming," he said quietly. "Of course I came. She's our daughter." The possessive pronoun hung in the air between them, significant and true. Maya had never explicitly claimed that role before, had been careful to respect the boundaries of her position in Emma's life. But in this moment of crisis, the truth had come out naturally, and Ryan realized it had been true for a while now. Maya wasn't just his partner. She was Emma's parent too, in all the ways that mattered beyond biology. The wait was long, the kind of anxious hours spent in uncomfortable plastic chairs watching people come and go while worry gnawed at your insides. Emma dozed fitfully against Ryan's side while Maya kept up a steady stream of quiet conversation, telling him about the patients she'd seen that day, sharing stories designed to distract him from his spiraling thoughts. When they finally got called back, the doctor was thorough, asking Emma questions, checking her pupils and reflexes, ordering a CT scan to rule out anything serious. Ryan held Emma's hand through the scan, his own fear carefully masked so she wouldn't see how terrified he actually was. The results came back clean. No fracture, no bleeding, just a mild concussion that would require rest and monitoring but would heal with time. The doctor gave them instructions for the next few days, warning signs to watch for, activity restrictions that would make Emma grumpy but were necessary for her recovery. "She's going to be fine," the doctor assured Ryan, reading the relief in his face. "Head injuries are scary, especially in kids, but this is relatively minor. Keep her quiet for a few days, wake her every few hours tonight to check on her, and she should be back to normal within a week." The drive home was quieter, Emma fully asleep in the back seat now that the adrenaline had worn off, Ryan's hands finally steady on the wheel. Maya sat beside him, her hand resting on his thigh in silent support. "I was terrified," Ryan admitted once they were safely back at the apartment, Emma tucked into bed with instructions to rest. "When the school called, all I could think about was being alone, having to handle this by myself, not having anyone to help carry the weight of it." "But you weren't alone," Maya said gently. "You're not alone anymore, Ryan. That's what this is. That's what we are. When something happens, we handle it together." "I know. And I'm so grateful you were there. But it made me realize something." He paused, trying to articulate the thought that had been forming during those long hours in the emergency room. "I've spent 5 years being Emma's only parent, making every decision myself, carrying all the responsibility alone. And I got so used to that, so conditioned to handling everything solo, that even now with you here, my default is still to think of myself as alone. But I don't want that anymore. I don't want to be just her father with you as support. I want us to actually be her parents, together, equally." Maya was quiet for a moment, and Ryan could see her processing the weight of what he was saying, the shift it represented. "That's a big step," she said carefully. "Are you sure that's what you want? Because once we cross that line, once I'm not just your girlfriend who lives here, but actually Emma's parent, that changes everything. That's a commitment that goes beyond our relationship with each other." "I know. And yes, I'm sure. You already are her parent in every way that matters. You just said it yourself at the hospital, our daughter. And you were right, she is ours, both of ours. And I want to make that official, not just in how we talk about it privately, but in how we present it to the world. What does official look like to you?" Ryan had been thinking about this, turning it over in his mind during the quiet moments of the past few months. "I want you to be able to make medical decisions for her. I want you listed at her school as a parent, someone they can call in emergencies. I want her to know that you're not going anywhere, that you're choosing her just as much as you're choosing me." "I am choosing her," Maya said firmly. "I chose her the first day I moved in, and she helped me carry boxes while providing commentary on proper unpacking techniques. I chose her every time I read her bedtime stories or helped with homework, or listened to her explain elaborate plot lines involving her stuffed animals. This isn't new for me, Ryan. I've been all in on Emma for a long time." "Then let's make it official, legal, real in ways that protect her and protect you, and make sure everyone understands that this is permanent." They talked late into the night, checking on Emma every few hours as instructed, discussing what permanent actually meant and what steps they'd need to take. Maya could potentially adopt Emma, though that would require legal processes and possibly attempts to contact Jen for consent. Or they could get married, which would grant Maya step-parent rights and make the legal relationship clear. The word marriage sat between them, significant and loaded. They'd been together less than a year, living together for 6 months. By conventional standards, it was too soon. But Ryan thought about the fact that Maya had been part of his life for nearly 2 years total, that she'd proven her commitment through actions rather than words, that she'd already integrated herself so completely into their family that her absence was unthinkable. "What do you think about marriage?" he asked, the question feeling both momentous and somehow inevitable. Maya's eyes widened slightly, surprise and hope mixing in her expression. "Are you asking me hypothetically or specifically?" "Specifically. I'm asking if you'd want to marry me. Not right now, not tomorrow, but someday, relatively soon. Because I love you, and Emma loves you, and you're already my partner in every way that matters. The only thing missing is the formal recognition of what we already are." "Yes," Maya said simply, her smile breaking across her face like sunrise. Yes, I want to marry you. I want to be Emma's stepmother legally. I want all of it. The commitment and the permanence and the family we've already built together, made official in ways the world can recognize. They sealed it with a kiss that tasted like relief and joy, and the kind of certainty that came from choosing each other deliberately, eyes open to all the potential difficulties, but certain the partnership was worth it. The next morning, Emma woke up with a headache but improved spirits, complaining about having to stay home from school and missing her friends. Maya made her breakfast while Ryan called into work, arranging to take a few days off to monitor Emma's recovery. They spent the day quietly, keeping Emma entertained with books and quiet games, enforcing rest periods when she got too energetic. It was during one of these rest periods, while Emma was dozing on the couch and Ryan was in the kitchen making lunch, that Maya brought up the conversation from the night before. "We should tell Emma," she said, "about getting married. She should know what we're planning." Agreed. When she's feeling better, we'll sit down and talk to her properly. Make sure she understands what it means and that she's comfortable with it. That conversation happened 3 days later when Emma was mostly recovered and had been cleared to return to school the following Monday. They'd planned it carefully, wanting to present the information in a way that was honest but age-appropriate, that gave Emma a voice in the decision without making her feel responsible for it. They gathered in the living room after dinner, Emma sitting between them on the couch with her elephant clutched in her lap, sensing something important was coming. Maya and I want to talk to you about something," Ryan began. "Something we're thinking about doing that would affect all of us." Emma looked between them, curious but not worried. "Okay. You know how Maya lives here with us now, and we're a family?" Ryan continued, and Emma nodded. "Well, we want to make that more official, more permanent. Maya and I are thinking about getting married." Emma's face lit up immediately. "Like a wedding? With a dress and cake?" Maya laughed softly. "Yes, like a wedding, though probably a small one. Nothing too fancy, but yes, a real wedding where your dad and I promise to stay together and be a family forever." "And you'd be my stepmom?" Emma asked, trying out the word. "I would be. Legally and officially, not just in practice. Which means I could help make decisions about you, be listed at your school as your parent, all the things that show the world that we belong to each other." Emma was quiet for a moment, processing this. Ryan waited, giving her space to think, to feel whatever she was feeling about this change. "Would I have to call you Mom?" Emma asked finally, and Ryan heard the uncertainty in her voice. "Only if you want to," Maya said gently. "You can keep calling me Maya if that feels right, or you can call me Mom, or we can figure out something else entirely. The name doesn't matter as much as the relationship, and that's already there. This is just making it official." "What about my real mom?" Emma's voice was smaller now, and Ryan felt his heart clench at the question he'd been half expecting, half dreading. "Your real mom is still your mom," Ryan said carefully. "Nothing changes that. She gave birth to you, and she'll always be your biological mother. But Maya is also your mom in a different way. The person who takes care of you every day, who helps you with homework and reads you stories and shows up when you need her. People can have more than one mom, and both can be real." Emma nodded slowly, absorbing this. Zoe at school has 2 moms and a stepmom because her parents are divorced and her moms got married to other people. She says it means more people to love her, which she thinks is good. "Zoe sounds very wise," Maya said, "and she's right. More people loving you is always good. Your biological mom may not be here right now, but she's still your mom, and I'm going to be your stepmom, which is also real and also important. You get to have both." "Okay," Emma said, the word carrying acceptance. Then, with the lightning-fast emotional shifts of childhood, she smiled. "Can I help pick out your dress? And can we have chocolate cake at the wedding? And can I invite my friends?" Ryan and Maya exchanged glances, relieved and amused by how quickly Emma had moved from processing to planning. "We'll figure all of that out together," Ryan promised. "But first we need to make sure you're really okay with this, with Maya and me getting married and becoming a family in this new way. If you have any worries or questions or anything that bothers you about it, you need to tell us. This is your family too, and your feelings matter." Emma considered this seriously, her face scrunching in concentration. "I think it's good," she said finally. "Maya makes you happy, and she makes me happy, And we're already a family anyway. Making it official just means it's forever, right? That's exactly what it means, Maya confirmed. Then yes, I want you to get married. I want Maya to be my stepmom officially. And I definitely want chocolate cake. Just like that, with the request for chocolate cake, the decision was made. Emma returned to her room to continue the elaborate zoo construction that had been her ongoing project for weeks, leaving Ryan and Maya on the couch processing what had just happened. That went better than I expected, Ryan said. She's resilient, and she trusts us to make good decisions for our family. We're lucky. We are. Ryan pulled Maya closer, kissing the top of her head. So I guess we're getting married. I guess we are. Any thoughts on when? Soon, Ryan said without hesitation. I don't want a long engagement. I don't need time to be sure about this. I'm already sure. They planned the wedding for late spring, giving themselves enough time to handle the legal requirements and basic arrangements, but not so much time that the waiting felt endless. It would be small, they decided, just close friends, a few coworkers, Emma's grandparents from Maya's side, who she'd been video chatting with weekly and who were delighted by the news. Derek and his wife Sarah offered to help coordinate, seeming to feel personally invested in Ryan's happiness after years of watching him maintain careful distance from any possibility of it. The ceremony would be at a small venue near the river, nothing fancy but meaningful, a celebration of what they'd already built rather than a performance for others. The months leading up to the wedding were busy but joyful. Emma took her role as wedding assistant very seriously, helping Maya choose flowers and debating the merits of various cake flavors with the intensity usually reserved for international diplomacy. Ryan handled the legal aspects, working with a family lawyer to establish Maya's parental rights and ensure that if anything happened to him, Emma would stay with Maya rather than entering the foster system or being claimed by distant relatives who'd never shown interest. They also, at Maya's suggestion, made one attempt to contact Jen. Not because they needed her permission, she'd legally abandoned Emma years ago and had no claim to custody, but because it seemed right to let her know what was happening, to give her the option to be involved if she wanted. The letter went unanswered. Ryan wasn't surprised, though he felt a pang of sadness for Emma, for the mother who'd chosen to miss all of this. But Maya had been right when she'd told Emma that people could have more than one mom, that biological and chosen family both mattered. Jen's absence didn't negate the family they were building. It just meant there was an empty space where she could have been, if she'd chosen differently. The wedding day arrived with perfect spring weather, the kind of clear blue sky that felt like a good omen. Emma wore a purple dress she'd picked out herself, her hair braided with flowers, her excitement evident in every bouncing step. Maya was beautiful in a simple cream dress that made her look luminous, and when Ryan saw her walking toward him at the outdoor ceremony, he felt his breath catch with the enormousness of what they were doing. The ceremony itself was short, their vows personal and honest. Ryan promised to choose Maya every day, to communicate even when it was hard, to build a life together that honored both their individual selves and their partnership. Maya promised to love Emma as her own, to support Ryan's parenting while bringing her own perspective, to create a home where all of them could be fully themselves. Emma stood beside them during the vows, holding the rings they'd chosen, simple bands that signified permanence without ostentation. When the officiant asked if anyone objected to the marriage, Emma had piped up with, "I don't object, I think it's great," which had made everyone laugh and broken the formal tension beautifully. The reception was held in the same venue, a casual gathering with good food and better company. Emma circulated among the guests like a tiny social director, making sure everyone had cake and knew where the bathroom was and understood that, yes, Maya was now officially her stepmom, which she thought was very cool. Ryan found himself standing at the edge of the celebration at one point, watching Maya dance with Emma to a song playing from the simple speaker system they'd rented, both of them laughing. Derek appeared beside him with 2 beers, handing one over without comment. "You did good," Derek said finally. "I know I give you grief, but seriously, you figured it out. You let yourself be happy. That takes guts." "I almost didn't," Ryan admitted. "I almost let fear win. If Maya hadn't been brave enough to speak up, I might still be alone, convincing myself it was safer that way. But you're not alone, and neither is Emma. That kid has 2 parents who love her and each other, which is more than a lot of kids get. You should be proud of that. Ryan was proud. Proud and grateful, and still slightly amazed that this was his life now, this celebration, this family, this future stretching out before him full of possibility instead of just careful management of risk. Later that night, after the reception had ended and they'd returned to the apartment with a sleepy Emma, they tucked her into bed together for the first time as legal spouses and step-parent. "Best day ever," Emma mumbled, already half asleep. "Even better than my birthday. Can we do this again?" "We only get one wedding, sweetheart," Ryan said, smoothing her hair back. "But we get every day after this together, as a family." "Good," Emma said, clutching her elephant. "I like our family." In their own bedroom, Ryan and Maya finally had a moment alone, the reality of being married settling over them. "How do you feel?" Maya asked, starting to take down her hair from the elegant updo she'd worn for the ceremony. "Married," Ryan said, testing the word. "Committed. Certain. Happy. All of the above. No regrets? No second thoughts?" "None. You?" "None," Maya confirmed. "This is exactly where I want to be. With you and Emma, building this life together. It feels right in a way nothing else ever has." Ryan pulled her close, feeling the solid reality of her in his arms, this woman who'd appeared next door with a bookshelf and patience and had somehow become the center of his world. "I love you," he said. "Thank you for not giving up on me when I was too scared to see what was right in front of me. I love you too, and I didn't give up because I knew what we could be if you'd just let yourself try. Sometimes the best things are worth waiting for." They fell asleep that night as husband and wife, the apartment quiet around them, Emma safe in her room, their future unwritten but no longer terrifying. Ryan's last thought before sleep claimed him was how different his life looked now compared to a year ago. How much had changed since that night when Maya had confessed her feelings, and he'd walked away to a date that meant nothing. He'd spent 5 years protecting himself and Emma from the possibility of loss, building walls and maintaining distance and convincing himself that safety was worth the loneliness. But Maya had shown him that real safety didn't come from avoiding risk. It came from finding people worth risking everything for, from building connections strong enough to weather difficulty, from choosing presence over protection. The months after the wedding settled into a rhythm that felt earned rather than accidental. Maya's presence in their lives shifted from new to established, her role as Emma's stepmother becoming natural through hundreds of small moments. She attended parent-teacher conferences and soccer games, helped with science projects and friendship drama, provided the kind of steady parental presence that Emma had been missing without quite knowing it. Ryan watched his daughter flourish under the attention of 2 parents, seeing her confidence grow in ways that came from knowing she was valued by multiple people, that she had more than one person to turn to when she needed support. The questions about her biological mother became less frequent, not because Emma forgot, but because the absence hurt less when the presence of chosen family was so strong. For Ryan, marriage to Maya brought a kind of peace he hadn't known he was capable of feeling. The constant low-level anxiety that had characterized his life for years, the fear of something going wrong, of being unable to handle it alone, of failing Emma in some fundamental way, had eased into something more manageable. Not gone entirely because he was still a parent and worry came with that territory, but no longer the defining feature of his existence. He and Maya developed their own rhythms, learning when to give each other space and when to push for connection, when to tackle problems together, and when to let each other handle things independently. They had disagreements, of course, about finances, about parenting approaches, about whose turn it was to deal with the broken disposal. But they'd learned to fight fair, to communicate clearly, to remember that they were on the same team even when they disagreed about tactics. A year after the wedding, on a quiet Sunday morning while Emma was at a friend's house for a sleepover, Ryan and Maya found themselves back on the couch where so much of their relationship had unfolded. Coffee mugs sat on the table, forgotten as they talked about everything and nothing, the kind of meandering conversation that came from being comfortable enough to not need constant entertainment. "Do you ever think about how different things could have been?" Maya asked, her feet tucked under her, her body curved toward his in the unconscious intimacy of long familiarity. "If I hadn't told you how I felt that night, if you'd gone on that date with Rebecca and it had actually worked out?" "Sometimes," Ryan admitted. Usually when I'm trying to fall asleep and my brain decides to torture me with alternate timelines. But then I wake up and you're there, and Emma's in her room, and this is real, and I'm just grateful I didn't let fear win. Me too. Though I have to admit, there were moments after I confessed when I thought I'd ruined everything, that you'd never be able to see me the same way, and I'd have to move out and start over somewhere else. I'm glad you didn't. I'm glad you gave us a chance. She shifted closer, resting her head on his shoulder in the gesture that had become their signature comfort position. You know what I think about sometimes? That first day I moved in, when you helped with my bookshelf and Emma supervised. I remember thinking you seemed sad, like you were going through the motions of life without actually being present for it. And I wanted to change that, even then. I wanted to make you smile. Did you succeed? I think so. You smile a lot more now. Emma noticed it too. She told me once that you seemed lighter after I moved in, like you weren't carrying something so heavy anymore. Ryan thought about that, about the weight he'd carried for so long without recognizing it as removable. The burden of single parenthood, of complete responsibility, of never having backup or support, or someone to share the load. Maya hadn't just become his wife. She'd become his partner in the truest sense, someone who carried half the weight so he didn't have to bear it all alone. You changed my life, he said quietly. Both of our lives. You gave Emma a mother, and you gave me a future I'd stopped believing in. That's not a small thing. You changed mine too. You gave me a family when I'd convinced myself I didn't need one. You let me in eventually, and trusted me with the things that mattered most to you. That's not a small thing either. They sat there in comfortable silence, the apartment peaceful around them, the life they'd built together evident in every corner. Emma's art projects on the refrigerator, Maya's running shoes by the door, Ryan's work bag on the chair, the bookshelf organized by color that satisfied no one but made everyone feel included. Evidence of three people living together, choosing each other, building something that would outlast the individual moments. When Emma came home that afternoon, full of stories about her sleepover and demanding they make cookies immediately because her friend's mom had made the best cookies ever and she wanted to try to recreate them, they moved into the kitchen as a unit. Ryan got out ingredients while Maya preheated the oven and Emma climbed onto a chair to supervise, offering suggestions that were enthusiastically impractical. This was it, Ryan thought, measuring flour while Maya cracked eggs and Emma debated the ratio of chocolate chips to dough. This was the life he'd almost been too afraid to reach for. Messy and loud and imperfect, and absolutely completely right. The cookies turned out fine. Not as good as Emma's friend's mom's, but good enough to eat warm from the oven while gathered around the kitchen table, chocolate smudging faces and contentment filling the space between them. Can we do this every Sunday? Emma asked through a mouthful of cookie. Make something together? It's fun. We can, Maya agreed, sharing a glance with Ryan. Making things together is kind of what we do best. And it was true. They'd made a family from separate pieces, built connection where there'd been isolation, created permanence from what had started as fear and reluctance and careful distance. They'd made a home not just by combining households, but by choosing each other every day, through difficulties and disagreements, and the thousand small moments that comprised a shared life. Ryan looked at his wife and daughter, chocolate smudged and happy, and felt a certainty he'd spent years running from. This was worth it, all of it. The fear he'd pushed through, the vulnerability he'd accepted, the risk he'd taken on Maya's love. Worth it for this moment and all the moments to come, the future stretching out before them full of possibility instead of just protection. He'd spent 5 years keeping people out, convinced that safety meant solitude. But Maya had taught him that real safety came from connection, that the risk of love was less than the certainty of loneliness, that choosing to be present, really present, fully engaged, heart open, was the only way to actually live. Dad, you're crying, Emma observed, concerned. Are you okay? Ryan wiped his eyes, surprised to find them wet. Yeah, sweetheart. I'm more than okay. I'm happy. Good, Emma said, satisfied. You should be happy. We all should be happy. We're a family. Simple truth from a 9-year-old who understood what Ryan had taken years to learn. They were a family. Not perfect, not without challenges, but real and chosen and there. And that was everything. Maya reached across the table and took his hand, her touch familiar and grounding, and Ryan held on, grateful for second chances and patient women and the courage it took to finally see what had been right next door all along.